Welcome back to another episode of RMV.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in for today's episode.
Today we have Mrs. Victoria Volk all the way from North Dakota.
Miss Victoria is a grief fighter, Reiki master, and a certified grief recovery specialist. We brought her in today to talk about grief since it's such an important topic to talk about and no one really talks about it much.
Yeah, and so maybe we can start with the question, what is grief?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm
Yeah.
thrilled to be here. What is grief? Grief is the feeling of anything that we wish would have been different, better, or more. Anything that it's a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. It's reaching out for someone that you wish would be there and, someone that you needed one last time and they're not there. Um, that's how the Grief Recovery Institute defines grief.
And what's the difference between grief and mourning?
I think they're much of the same in a way. And we grieve lots of things, not just the death of a loved one. There's many reasons. I mean, COVID really highlighted that for so many people, teens included, that are having to stay home and on lockdowns and couldn't go to school and be with their peers. There's grief in that, so there's lots of ways that we grieve or mourn. Um, it's a sadness, right?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we got to talk about grief because it's such an important topic and no one really talks about it. So I'm really glad you're here to talk about it. So, what are the stages of grief?
There are actually no stages of grief. That is a
Oh,
misconception. Yeah. So Elizabeth Keebler-Ross, her work was actually based, which that idea was kind of misconstrued, but her work was actually based on these stages that someone goes through when they're diagnosed with a terminal illness. And so as, anger, denial, those what people tend to think are stages of grief, it's actually stages of what her work is based around terminal illness. Now, not saying someone who's grieving isn't experiencing those similar emotions or feelings, but grief isn't linear. It's not like this, you feel this way, now you feel that way, now you feel this way. And 5 years from now, well, I shouldn't feel this way anymore because I've gone through that phase or stage, right? So um, basically, you can take grief and instead of point A to point B, it's more like, can't see this now, but it's like scribbly lines. It's not linear at all. So um, there are no stages.
yeah. Now that I think about it, it makes sense that there's no stages. Yeah, before like there's others, the stages for like other things, but now when you mentioned it, yeah, there's no stages because it's like it can take how long ever it takes.
Yeah, and I think too, someone might. The danger of that is that, like I said, people might think, well, you're grieving already 2 years. You should be over this by now, or they might say or think, well, it's been a year. Maybe they're past the denial stage. That's the danger of that, of applying it to grief.
Yeah, that's very true. So what are some ways that people cope with grief?
um, well, I think in the ways are really similar across the board, whether you're a teen or an adult. I think if you picture yourself or imagine yourself like a tea kettle, and okay, let me backtrack. So as a child, you have a backpack, right? And your dog dies. Okay, you add a rock to your backpack. That's really sad. That's maybe traumatic for a child. So you put a rock in your backpack. Well, then maybe your grandma dies. Well, I'm going to add another rock. Maybe your bike is stolen. That's another rock. And so as we get older, we add these rocks to our backpacks. So grief does build up over time. Grief is cumulative and it's cumulatively negative. And so all of those grief experiences that we experience from childhood on kind of build up in our bodies emotionally. That energy kind of gets stuck. And so if we think of ourselves like a tea kettle, we either implode or we explode. And when we implode, it affects our body physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We can, like for me personally, I had hair loss. I lost weight, a bunch of weight in a short period of time. I had fibromyalgia like symptoms, like where I just felt achy all over, this overall achiness with no medical reason. I, you know, people can have migraines or um, much disease, actually, like dis-ease in the body equates to disease in like that, how it manifests. And so if we don't get that emotional stuff out, then how a lot of people cope too is they resort to behaviors to make them feel better for a short period of time. So you might go on Facebook and scroll for 2 hours. Like everyone else's life looks really bad. Okay, I don't feel so bad about mine. Or you might binge watch Netflix or TV, or fantasy books, shopping, gambling, um, partners, intimate partners. Um, it really gets to the point where you kind of detach from yourself. You really don't, you're unable to tune into what's really going on because it kind of snowballs and it gets out of control. And that's kind of what happens. We're tea kettles for sure when it comes to grief. It manifests in our bodies and it manifests in our lives. And it's different and similar, if that makes sense, across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think no one can really hold on to so many problems. They'll eventually, as you said, explode or implode. So yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask, do you have a personal way you grieve, Miss Victoria?
Well, with the grief recovery method, I have the tools and the knowledge to process any relationship that is causing me dis-ease in my life. And that's the beautiful thing about grief recovery is that once you learn it, you have the tools for the rest of your life. Because oftentimes too, the people living in our lives cause us grief, sometimes even the most grief, because they're always there. And so there's always going to be some sort of, especially if you have problems with boundaries, if that's not someone you can really feel safe communicating with, you're always going to have these things that um, really make it difficult to develop a closeness and a connection and a relationship that's deep. And that grief really causes this makes this separation between not only ourselves, like with our inner selves, but also our relationships. And so it is really important that we continue to work on the relationships in our lives so that we can feel deep connection. And despite whatever the issues are, right? It's coming to a place of, I know that person's not going to change. I know this is just how it is, but I have the tools and the knowledge where I can process what I'm feeling without having to address that person directly. And that's the beautiful thing about grief recovery is you don't have to even have that conversation with the person. You work on yourself. And that's the whole idea.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I think everyone should listen to that. It's like an
So that's how I cope. I
yeah.
continue to use the tools I've learned.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. So why do you think grief is important to talk about?
Why isn't it? I think it's everywhere and we're not immune. No one is immune and it touches us all. It's the one thing that unites us all.
Yeah, that's very true. It does unite us all. And as you said, like, some people have it more than others. Like you don't really know what's going inside of everyone's minds. They may look happy on the outside, but on the inside they may be grieving and have so many different problems that people don't know about.
Well, on the flip side of grief, too, is that it really costs the economy billions of dollars every year in loss of productivity and, um, yeah, just loss of productivity. Because if you think about it, when you have a lot of issues going on in your life and grief in your life, you're not going to come to work and you're not going to be, operating at 100%. And not saying you always have to and you always will, but when we are deep in grief, especially with a significant loss, you maybe get 4 days to a week of paid time off. If maybe it's paid, it might not be. And then you're supposed to come back and be, you know, performing like you did before, and people expect you to be how you were before, and that's not the case. And so there's a lot of lack of support within um, our economy when it comes to grief support in the workplace, and so it costs our economy billions.
I guess there isn't that much support when people are, having going through problems. Like they need, their time, but they can't because they have a job. They have to make money somehow, and I think it's really important that people should take care of themselves.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people um, getting to be like my age in the 40s into the 50s that are now taking care of their parents as well. And so yeah, I think there are so many issues there when it comes to grief that um, we could be doing better. Now, granted, I'm not saying there aren't companies out there that are doing phenomenal things, and there very well could be. I'm just saying overall, I think the statistic was from 2012. It was like I'm going to get it wrong, but it is in the billions of what it costs our economy. And that was 2012. I can't imagine what it is now today after COVID, you know?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are grieving
Wow.
so much during this time because it's COVID, and a lot of people, like old people especially, they're like dying because of the COVID. So yeah, I just wanted to say, so I realized that your website's called the Unleashed Heart. So I thought it was really unique, and I really like the sound of it too. So what is it about?
Hmm. Well, I actually, in 2014, I kind of had a midlife crisis. I closed, well, the following year, I closed a business. My daughter started kindergarten, and I just was feeling, I had a photography studio. I ran a photography business and just felt like I was meant for more. I didn't feel as fulfilled as I should have been, even though I was doing really well. I just felt like something was missing in my life. And she started kindergarten, and I closed that business, and I just had this like midlife crisis of what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I started to really, that's when I really started to dig into myself and go have introspection. And I spent several years doing that. And in that time, I wrote a book and started a blog called The Guided Heart, where I wrote about personal development, spirituality, faith, things like that. And it evolved into from the guided heart to the unleashed heart. And it just came to me one night as I was drifting off to sleep. And I thought, oh, for sure, this is domain's taken. And it wasn't. And so I think it was just meant to be. And I really have not felt unleashed really until probably until grief recovery, really. I mean, that really opened up my heart and my life to so many. I felt open to possibility really for the first time. I really felt unleashed. And that's what it's about. It's the ability to not let the past be the dictator of your present and your future anymore. It's empowering yourself. It's about empowerment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's cool that you're helping people who, go through grief. And I think it's really cool how you started this organization, or like this this way that people can, help come and contact you and help you. I wanted to ask, like, how do children, grieve differently than adults? And like how do you help children too? Is it different compared to adults?
Yeah, children, I was a child griever. My dad died when I was 8. And so I have known grief most of my life. And at that time in the 80s, people really didn't talk about grief. Like nobody talked about grief in the 80s. And in culturally too, I'm German background. We really don't talk about grief. We don't talk about our feelings. Like, you have to be strong, and um, you don't show emotion. You don't, and so I grew up not showing emotion. Like I would go run and hide to cry. And children are all different because we're all different, right? And so you might see a child that might seem like they're doing really well. They can wear a smile really well. And you might have children that have anger issues. So because we're all different, it's, but I would say anger is just someone who is hurt. Anger is just sadness, really. And I think that we learn, I don't think, I know, we learn by our environment, the examples in our environment. And so if our parents are not emulating a healthy communication around grief, and how to process and look at it and to take care of our hearts in that way, we learn. That's how we learn. We're sponges as kids. We're sponges. We take everything in. We're just receptors of information. And it's not necessarily things that are seen, it could be heard, or lack of emotional connection is huge in childhood because touch is massive when you're growing. I mean, as a baby, you can actually physically die as a baby without touch. Um, you need that connection. And so, and we're wired for connection. And if we're not getting that within the context of grief, it really sets us up for problems in adulthood. And actually, there's something called the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences. And the more ACEs that you have in your childhood, the more likely you are to have addiction and behavioral issues and mental illness in adulthood. Um, yeah, it's the, I mean the work that's being done in the research in terms of children and grief is very expansive in the ACE study. Highly recommend anybody who's curious about children and grief to look into that. But um, in the work that I do, I'm not able to work directly with children because I'm not a licensed therapist. Um, but there are many grief recovery specialists who are and who are licensed therapists as well. But I actually facilitate a program that's called Helping Children with Loss that is actually for the adult caretakers or parents. And it's a 4-week online method. And we meet once weekly for 4 weeks. And you really learn, you empower yourself as a parent or a caretaker to feel confident that you're doing and saying and being there in the way that you feel, that in a way that you you can be for a child who's grieving.
Yeah, I feel like when you're a child and let's say you're like 6 or 5, or like when you're young, if you're young and you lose someone like your parent or something, I think, for example, like orphans, it's really devastating because, when, at this time of life, like they didn't know, right? Like they're living with their adoptive parents, but they're like, oh, where are my real parents? So I think it's like really devastating, like when they're young too, because like they can't see their parents. And it's like a whole different story. And like a lot of people say like my adoption is, it's a beautiful thing, there's nothing to be heard about it or something like that. So yeah, I think like they grieve more when they're young, but as they grow older, they're able to like overcome it. So which brings to my next question: how do you create a positive and healthy environment around you to overcome the grief?
I think it's that word overcome because I don't know that we ever, it's not about overcoming grief. It's really about learning to live with it differently because grief changes over time. I mean, my grief is very different now than it was when I was 8, right? But that sadness never goes away. My dad is never, like, when I got married, he wasn't there. When my first child was born, he wasn't there. There are these milestone moments that we have throughout our life where that sadness comes back to us, right? It's not going to go away. That sadness doesn't go away. But I don't find myself in a like puddle on the floor and like this emotional state of I can't function for days, or if I think of a memory that upsets me or makes me sad, like it doesn't like pull me into the past and take me out for a few days because I'm just emotionally so distraught. So it's about not necessarily overcoming, but really learning how to cope in a healthy way rather than what we always resorted to before: drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, shopping, all those things, or anger, or physical symptoms. So it's really being able to um, address the grief in a healthy way where it doesn't dictate. It's not the captain of your life anymore. you know did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, that did. Um, so if we know someone who is in grief, like how can we help them?
Ask ask how you can help them, because everybody's different. um, I think that sometimes grievers don't even know what they need or want, especially if it's just a recent loss. It's like, maybe they haven't even processed what happened. um, Maybe just give them that time and space, and maybe just say that, you know what, I'm going to give you the time and space that you need, but I want you to know that I am here for you. Anytime, text me, call me. Um, and maybe don't even put it on them. Maybe just call or text. How are you feeling today? Is there anything that you need that I can pick up for you? I'm at the grocery store. Do you need anything? Um, or listen for the cues of a friend, of what they're saying. Like, oh, I'm just so tired lately. Well, if they're really tired, then maybe they don't have the energy to mow their lawn. If they're really tired, maybe they don't have the energy to do the dishes. Or if it's, other adults, maybe they need help with carpool, or, get a food train going. Or there's so many practical things. Send a housekeeper, pay someone to clean the house. There's so many things that we can do, that if we just listen, really, it's being open and hearing to what's being said and then responding. But also, too, respecting that um, everybody's different, and that they may not respond to their grief the same way you would. And that's not right or wrong. It's just how they're dealing with it, and not to take it personally. I think that's where a lot of relationships fall away after a devastating loss, because we tend to take things personally. And as grievers, I had this discussion not that long ago about, and I actually wrote a blog post about it, or a social post. But as a griever, it's not your people might as a griever, you might feel like it's not your responsibility to tell people what they should do or how they should respond. But in essence, it kind of is, because if you want your grief to be honored in the way that you want it honored, people aren't mind readers. They don't know. They don't know. And so communicating in a way that you feel, in a way that is right for you, whether it be writing a letter, writing an email, like a mass email, starting a blog. A lot of grievers I've talked to over the past year, almost a year, have written blogs, a place where people can go to see and address, and to actually read for themselves on their own time what's going on. And then you don't feel like you have to like reach out to them. But as a griever, you get to decide how people respond to you and help you. And you do have a say in that. And so, but you have to communicate that.
I think that's really helpful, like especially at this day and age, like everyone's trying to be there for each other. Like you never know what that person, might be going through. So I think like it's really important that you said that. So do you think is there like long term grief? Is there like a specific time people like grieve for like this amount of time, or like is there anything like that?
Well, when I say the phrase time heals, do you know the rest of it? Time heals.
No.
Oh, you don't? Well, there's this expression that time heals all wounds.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I think I've
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
that.
See, now you know, right? Like everybody knows, like everybody's heard that at some point. Like time heals all wounds. Like, no, it doesn't. Time just passes. It's the action that we take within time that matters.
Yeah.
And so there's 6 myths of loss that we generally as a society are born into and learn, because it's this generational learning that I kind of spoke about earlier. Like we learn from the environment in which we are in. And so it's don't feel bad, replace the loss, grieve alone, be strong, keep busy, and time heals all wounds. So no, there is no time frame to grief.
Yeah, I think. I think everyone should realize that too. Like if people knows people, some people are going to grieve, they should know like it takes time. Like even if it takes a couple months to in a year, you can't say like, oh, aren't you over this yet? Like I think that if you say that, that would really hurt them because it's really important to them. So I think you should everyone should know that grieving isn't it lasts. Like it changes over time, as you said, but it's always in there.
And let me
Um,
address too, like again, before I found grief recovery, I was a griever for over 30 years. Over 30 years of my life, I had not addressed the grief in my life.
yeah,
And it created a lot of problems throughout my life because of it. So it wasn't until I took action to address that grief that my life changed. So that's why I say time just passes, whether it's 30 years, 13, or 3. But if you take no action, those years will really pass.
Yeah, for me, it took like almost 2 years. Like my granddad passed away like all of a sudden, and like I still remember
mm,
like um I think it was like after school, like my mom. So I'm the last person she picks me up because I'm in high school, and then my sister is in junior high. Oh, actually, at the time it was elementary. Never mind. In like sixth grade. So I remember like when I got in the car, she just all of a sudden like cried, like, and she was driving too. So I was like, "What happened, mom? Like, what happened?" And she like told me everything, like, and we were just quiet for like the entire car ride. And it was like I remember like it took me almost 2 years, and like for her also it took like maybe a few months, and then like my family and stuff like that. So I kind of know like how like there are different ways to cope with it, and also like you said, time doesn't heal wounds. Like it takes time, and yeah.
Yeah, it takes action.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
It takes action. I'm
yeah. I
sorry.
also, yeah, I was gonna say I also had a similar experience too. Yeah, my great grandparents also passed away a couple years ago, and yeah, it was actually it's very hard on us, in talking to our family and like everyone's going through the same thing, and yeah, so yeah, I've also experienced
Yeah,
it
and
too.
everyone will, like in a family, in the context of family and grief and loss, people, the whole family will, they're experiencing the same thing, but everyone will experience it differently. And that's the point too I want to get across, is that we can experience the same loss as someone else. Like we can have a sibling that we both had a parent pass away, but our experiences are very different because that relationship was different.
Yeah, that's true. Like my mom had a different relationship than
Mhm.
me. Yeah, so moving on, we wanted to talk about Reiki. That's a type of healing process that you do, right? So do you want to talk about what that is?
Oh, I love Reiki. Energy healing. Yeah,
Energy.
it's a Japanese healing modality. It's been around for since the 1900s, um, early 1900s. There is a lot of lineages for Reiki. I am an Asui Holy Fire Reiki master, and then I'm a Karuna Holy Fire Reiki master. And Karuna is its own, it's not a part of Asui. It's its own, it's like its own type of Reiki. Uh, but yeah, I am a Reiki master. I could teach Reiki also. I haven't gone down that path yet, but I could also be a teacher if I wanted to be.
Wow, that's really cool. Cause like I don't really know anything about Reiki, and then my mom was saying like I'm like, oh yeah, we're interviewing Victoria, and she's like a grief specialist and also like a Reiki master, and she's like, oh my god, I've always wanted to do Reiki, so I always wondered like what is Reiki and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's how do I explain it? It's really hard to explain because it's something that's so hard to explain. It's great for stress reduction. It really just allows the body, like the sympathetic nervous system, to really relax. And so that our bodies can do what it naturally does, and that's heal. And so it's not claiming, like I would never claim to heal you, but it allows your body to do what it naturally does from the inside out. And but it's wonderful for stress reduction, for anxiety. It's actually becoming more mainstream now. It's actually used with in more than 700 hospitals in the United States. It's becoming very much more acceptable or common for cancer treatment patients. Um, yeah, it's really opened my eyes to to the energy of emotions and the energy that we store in our bodies because of emotions. And it's because of grief recovery that I felt like led to Reiki, I believe. I was more open to it. Excuse me. Because I'd never experienced a Reiki session in my life. I'd never really even knew about it myself. When I went to get certified, I just felt this. And most people who are Reiki masters, they go into Reiki because they feel a calling to it. It's because they feel drawn to it. And so if the universe keeps nudging you on the head, like Reiki, 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 or you keep seeing it or you keep hearing it everywhere, perhaps it's a nudge to listen to. And that's what happened for me. Like I just kept hearing about it and, like randomly. And I'm like, what is Reiki? And so that's what set me off and talking with people, other Reiki masters. And I found my teacher and she's phenomenal. There's only 30 licensed Reiki masters in the world. And one of them is my teacher. And so I feel very blessed with that. So
Wow.
yeah, I love Reiki.
Wonderful.
I
Yeah.
have a Reiki session this afternoon, actually. So
Oh,
yeah,
Ah, that's
you
cool.
can,
Yeah.
and it knows no time or space. And so I've had Reiki sessions with clients in Australia, in South Korea, Canada, anywhere in the United States. Yeah, it knows no time or space. And so I can, because I'm a Reiki master, I can do distance Reiki. Um, Actually, when you are Reiki 1 and 2 certified, you can then do distance Reiki. But as a Reiki master too, I can do distance Reiki or in person. And so, yeah.
yeah. So what's a typical? What was I gonna say? Oh yeah. What is a typical session of Reiki like?
Well, every Reiki practitioner is different, and the lineages might be just a little different too. I'm not familiar with any other lineage other than Asui. But for a Reiki session with me, I don't touch. Some Reiki practitioners put hands on and touch the certain areas of the body. I don't feel the energy that way as much. Like I feel it more so just kind of hovering. I don't feel like I need to touch. Actually, I feel it turning on just as I'm talking about it. It's kind of weird. Um, it's a lane of hands that they call, and you just have these different body positions or positions that you hold over the body. Um, and because every practitioner is different, what comes up for me oftentimes, every session is different. I can have a session with someone every month and every session is very different. um, I've had sessions where I've removed really deep emotional blocks. I've had sessions where a specific organ has come up. um, Oftentimes it's chakras that come up for me, and like emotional stuff. I'm an empath myself. I'm an empath. So I can easily take on other people's energy, but I can really feel other people's emotional energy and their emotional state and what's going on. But I also have a medical background. And so I do find that sometimes medical things come up, like just like I said, certain organs or things like that. So yeah, every session is different. I love it.
And yeah, this is for everyone, right? Children, kids, and seniors.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
have children that
Mhm.
come to me. Yep, for
Yeah.
sure.
That's really cool.
It does no
uh,
harm. Reiki does
mhm.
no harm. It's love and light energy. It's just pure love and light energy. I am just the conduit. It's not me. It's not me doing, it's not me. And some people, that's where people struggle with it. Maybe it's like this higher power, um,
Okay.
I use God. I resonate with God. And so it's this pure love and light, God loving energy for me. Some people might say universe or this higher higher being, or brothers and sisters of the light, just people that passed before us and are enlightened beings now because they're not on the physical plane. um, we could really go deep with all of that. But it really has opened me up personally to spirituality and just how we're all connected. Just we are all everything is energy. Everything. We are made up of energy on a
Mhm.
cellular level.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool way of healing. Yeah, when Varsha mentioned Reiki, I was also like, what's Reiki? I've never heard of it. Then I did more research. I'm like, oh, it's a healing process. That's so interesting. And that's very fascinating a fascinating way to heal.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, moving on. So you have a podcast too. It's called the Grieving Voices podcast. So why did you start this podcast? And like, what's the message that you want to give to your listeners?
Yeah, I started Grieving Voices because I wanted us, society, to talk about grief like we talk about the weather. And I wanted to give grievers the time and space with a safe person as myself to share their story and where they won't be analyzed, criticized, or judged. And many of my listeners have come back and shared that it was very therapeutic for them. Um, Not listeners, guests have said that it was therapeutic for them. And yeah, and I'm really passionate about the education piece because we are so uneducated around grief. And so, yeah, I'm very passionate about the grief piece. And so I try to incorporate that into the questions that I ask. It's very conversational style. I don't have a tight script or anything like that, but there are certain questions that they choose that they want to answer those questions for other people. Like what was helpful as a griever, like what was helpful for me, what are some things that people did that I appreciated? What are some unhelpful or hurtful things that people said? So it's through story, other grievers can hear themselves and other people's or can see themselves in other people's stories, but also someone who's wanting to support a griever will receive an education based on that story. So there's something for everyone, I think, in every episode. And it's really bringing hope that despite life's circumstances in our experiences, which I've interviewed some people whose life experiences have been horrendous. The next episode coming out this next Tuesday, it's very much a hero's journey story. And she should have been dead by the time she was 16. I couldn't believe she was talking to me, but instead she got her PhD in creative arts, in creative writing, or yeah, creative arts. But yeah, she's a phenomenal woman. I've just met so many incredible people who are beacons of hope now because they have taken their story and they have not allowed it to take them down in life. They've really transformed it and made it something for the good of others and themselves.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you started the podcast because, as you said, not many people are educated of grief and like other things. So it's really nice that you started. So check the Grieving Voices podcast. We'll put the link down in the description so you guys can listen to it. So I had one more question going back to Reiki. So do you like use crystals? Like I realized that in Reiki you use crystals. So can you maybe talk a little bit about that and the significance of it?
Hmm. I don't personally incorporate crystals into my sessions. I never really even like my point of view of crystals is like, okay, it's a rock.
Yes.
like I'm still like,
Yeah.
even still like, okay, I'm not so sure about this. But what's interesting is that I have what's called a Reiki grid. And on this grid, I have different crystals. But because everything is energy, right? And everything holds a frequency, crystals do too. And so it's really, I actually have like Palo Santo is my absolute favorite essential oil. But I have a Palo Santo bracelet. And, it's a very sacred wood. And, but for some reason, I just feel better when I'm wearing this bracelet because it kind of wards off negative energy. It's a purifier. Um, and so I think there's something said about it. But I think too, you have to, it's like this belief, right, that you have to have, I think, within you as well. It's, and it's a lot of, I think, our mental point of view, or our, like, how do I want to say this? Let's say someone is diagnosed with a terminal illness, okay? And but they believe, like, I'm going to beat this. Like, and they like, visualization is so important when it comes to healing. In terms, like, okay, so Louise Hay, if you've never heard of Louise Hay, she cured herself of a really terminal cancer. She had I think it was uterine cancer, but every day she would visualize this cancer being washed away by water. Like, this water would purify her body and wash it away. And she did no other treatments, I believe. It's You Can Heal Your Life is her book, where she talks about it. But just your mind doesn't know the difference between reality or fiction, right? And so if you're visualizing it, it's, and then you can go into manifestation and all this and that. But I think there's something to it, in that if you believe, I mean, what does it matter? you know so if you believe a crystal is going to help you, does it really matter if, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it'll help you if you think it's going to help you.
Yeah.
I don't incorporate them into my sessions, but there's a lots of things that can be incorporated into a Reiki session that I haven't really even dived into yet. Just really um, I'm really actually more interested in, like, the Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and the different points of our bodies, and the yin and the yang. So I'm more interested in the medical aspect of Reiki, and healing in that way when it comes to traditional Chinese medicine. But I haven't been led to the crystals within Reiki yet. And that's where like I said, every Reiki practitioner is different. But there's people that use pendulums. Um, I haven't really played with that yet. Um, but yeah, it's an evolving practice, and so every practitioner is different. Did that answer your question? I know it's probably a really long-winded
Yeah,
way
yeah,
to
that's
answer it, but I
also
just think it comes down to belief, really.
Yeah, I think believing it's a strong thing. If
Mhm.
you believe in something, as you said, like with that lady Louise Haynes,
Louise Hayes.
Louise
Louise
Hayes. Yeah,
Hayes. Mhm.
that's really interesting how she thought of that way. So yeah, I think if you believe something, it's very important, very valuable to
Actually, I think Louise Hay. Louise
Louise
Hay.
Hay. Okay,
Yeah.
Louise Hay. So we were actually on your website and we saw a quote that says, "It is never too late to start again and again and again if you need to." And like we were both really like inspired by that, and like we thought like, wow, that's such an inspirational message. So we wondered, like how did you derive this message?
Mm. I'm glad you gals pointed that out, and picked up on that, because I think there's this idea that, well, for me personally, I felt like my how I was feeling when I was at my lowest, like, this is just how I'm gonna feel. Like, this is just how it is. Like, life is just gonna suck in this way for the rest of my life. And I just found myself repeating these same patterns of behavior, and this cyclic, like, the cyclic same issues just kept reoccurring in my life. I was abusing alcohol in my early 20s, and I was still in as a mother, I would resort to alcohol to feel better. I'm now sober over a year. I completely 100% gave up alcohol overnight, literally. I decided, and I never had a drop since.
Wow.
And I did that with the help of grief recovery, because I worked on my relationship to alcohol. And that's the beautiful thing about it too, is you can apply grief recovery to other things other than just relationships and people. But I applied it to my relationship with alcohol, because it is a relationship, just like we have a relationship to our bodies and to food. And so I worked through that relationship that way, and also through Reiki. And so that's how I was able to give up alcohol, I think, in the way that I did. Um, Now, I wasn't a daily drinker, but I was a frequent drinker, and it wasn't just a glass of wine, it would be a bottle of wine. And the question I asked myself was, why do I need this? Why do I feel like I need this? And so to answer your question, it's never too late to start again and again and again if you need to. It's this, just don't give up. You can't give up. You know, you fall off the wagon one day, tomorrow's a new day. Start again.
Yeah, I think people tend to think like, once you give up, they give up. Like they stop, doing whatever they wanted to do. Because, giving up is such like uh, a low, you're just like, I can't do this anymore. And, you just stop. So I think that's very important not to give up.
Yeah, you just haven't found something that works. That's it. You just haven't found something that sticks. You know, it's like spaghetti. You just got to keep throwing spaghetti at the wall until something sticks. And for me, it was grief recovery that stuck, and Reiki has stuck. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like a really great way to put it. I also like the quote that you said, it's never too late to start again and again and again if you need to. That's
Mm-hmm.
really cool. So yeah, so I realized that you wrote a book and it's called The Guided Heart.
Yeah, I wrote that when I started that blog, or it was maybe a couple of years after I started that blog. And it was me diving into my loss of my father and the other traumas I experienced after that. And it was very therapeutic for me. But during the editing phase of that book, I had another loss actually that opened up all the wounds of that loss of my father. And that's actually for another book, I think. But yeah, it's really just my story, trying to share what I learned in the process and what helped me along the way. But what I know now, looking back, is those things really didn't help me to recover from the grief. They helped me evolve as a person and they helped me kind of dig deeper into myself, but they didn't address the grief. And that's what I look in hindsight now is, yeah, you know, these certain programs or these books or mentors or people or what have you that I discovered in those years before writing the book, and as I was writing it, really, none of it addressed the grief, and that was really the heart of my issue, was my grief and trauma, because trauma happens and grief is what's left.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, how you wrote a book on it. Yeah, we'll also link the book and the podcast down below, so make sure you guys check it out. So on your website, I also noticed that you have blogs too. So do you also write stuff like about grief and like educate people on it too?
Yes, I have a
Yeah.
weekly blog post that I
Mhm.
publish every Friday, although I did miss last week Friday, and that's the only second blog post I've missed in like 2 years. So it's just been really crazy. Like March, I'm hashtag March Madness in my life. This month has been crazy. But yeah, I have a weekly blog post. I have a weekly newsletter I send out every Wednesday. However, it is going to bi-weekly just because I did a survey and I have a lot going on in my life, and I just feel like bi-weekly would give more substance. I'd be able to give more substance to my newsletter. So that's going to be bi-weekly starting on the 17th of March. And then I have the weekly podcast episode that comes out every Tuesday. Um, yeah, and I work with clients online and in person, both with grief recovery and with Reiki. And yeah, so I got lots going on, but I love it. This is my alignment. I'm in full alignment, living my passion for sure.
Yeah, you do so many different things to educate about grief in so many different ways. I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we will link her website down below if you want to contact her or get any more information.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we actually have some questions from our listeners. So one of our listeners asked, are there any medications to eliminate grief or like to help with grief?
Hmm. Well, I think there is something, I'm not a mental health professional licensed. I don't dispense medication. But if you're speaking to like clinical depression, um, that's kind of a deeper thing that needs probably medical intervention in terms of medication. I've interviewed someone, a great episode on clinical depression is There's an episode I did with a gentleman named David Woods Bartley. I actually split it into two parts because it was like a 2-hour conversation on suicide prevention. He struggled with clinical depression and still struggles with clinical depression. It's not something that just goes away, right? And so he's, takes care of himself in all sorts of ways, not just with medication, but and he struggled with suicidal ideation as well. And it was going to he was going to jump off a bridge and someone intervened. And so now he's a speaker on the topic. That's a great episode to look to for clinical depression insight. Um, I think we can have moments in time in our lives where we feel depressed or we can be in a depressive state. I experienced postpartum depression after my second and third child, and it was much worse after my third child. And the first thing that the nurse practitioner wanted to do was put me on an antidepressant, and she did. And I tried it, and I took myself off of it. I did not intuitively, that was not what I needed. What I did need was I needed grief recovery, actually, is what I needed. I needed to address the grief that I had that was coming up again in the postpartum depression that I was experiencing. I also used to always have issues with seasonal depression. Sometimes it can be a seasonal thing where we get more depressive during, when there's not as much sunlight, and because sunlight is huge. And so if you live in the northern hemisphere like I do, I had a SAD light. They call it a SAD light, seasonal affective disorder. Excuse me. I have a light for that. That greatly helped me. It helps to resync your sleep cycle and things like that. But I'm finding I don't even need that as much. Interestingly, I haven't given that much thought, but yeah, ever since I've really processed my grief, it's changed my life. It's changed every area of my life. And so I think it's not necessarily a medication that you need. Sometimes you just need a process and a structure and a framework and the right support to address
Yeah.
the grief.
Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
what I said it. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think it's really important for people, to process grief. They need to find a process.
so our last question is actually from our script writer. So she asked, so there's a new Marvel show on Disney Plus. I don't know if you guys heard, but it's called WandaVision or something. But anyways, if you guys haven't watched it, please go watch it before I say this. It's like kind of like a spoiler, I guess. I haven't watched it myself. But anyways, she said that WandaVision had gained immense popularity and support over the past few weeks, and one line spoken on the show resonated with a lot of fans all over the world. And the line was, "What is grief if not love preserving?" How do you feel about how do you resonate with this line, and how true does it stand?
Mm. Well, we grieve because we love, right? That's what grief comes from, is a place because we love. That's why we grieve. And so the part of if not love preserving, I think it's just this idea of, I think that's what kind of holds people back from actually wanting to address their grief, because they might feel like, this is what we see in grief recovery, is the resistance to addressing the grief is often because they're afraid that if they let go or they process, that somehow they'll forget, or somehow it's dishonoring. It's almost like this, I'm honoring my loved one because I'm just in this emotional state of such deep loss. But you can't see the label from inside the jar. And so when you are in that state and it goes on and on and on throughout your life, 30 plus years, for example, you don't see how it's negatively impacting every area of your life. You don't see how it's keeping you from, it's blocking you really from your own truth, from your own who you are on the inside. Your potential kind of gets stifled. You don't feel like you can fully express you don't really fully express yourself because you've got this veil of grief that's just like blocking you. So when you look in the mirror, you don't see you see the grief. And so it's out of fear. And that a lot of people, why they don't want to address their grief, it's this fear. But that's what I love about grief recovery is it's 7 or 8 weeks. It's a time frame. And you know that you're going to there's an end date. It's not like you're going to go to support groups for 12 years, which I've known grievers who have gone to support groups for 12 years. You don't need that. It's, you don't have to go week after week and say the same story and go home and feeling terrible because you're hearing other people's sad story. You take in that energy, and if you're hearing just sad story after sad story, and how does that make you feel better? How does that move you forward? It doesn't. And so I think it's this idea of, well, if I'm holding on to this, I'm preserving that love, but really you're blocking yourself from it. You're blocking yourself from being able to love fully yourself and other people who are living around you.
Yeah, that's very interesting how you put it. Yeah, I didn't really think about that until you spoke more about it. And it's very deep if you think about it. And
it is very deep. And I
Yeah.
can say that because I'm on the other side of it. But when you're not and you're deep in it, you can't see to the other side. And that's why, too, I feel like my podcast is hope, because it's people on the other side of it, or it's people who are actively working to get to the other side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah.
Wow, I think we covered a lot. I appreciate your time and having me on, and you two are doing a wonderful thing too. So thank you for the work that you do.
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining. It was very interesting talk.
Yeah.
Before the podcast, I didn't really know what this was going to be about, because I wasn't as educated as before now. So yeah, I think this is a really good talk to have, and I think it's going to be really good to our listeners too.
Great.
Yeah, I enjoyed this interview. It was really insightful and like enlightening. So I enjoyed it, every minute of it.
I'm glad to hear. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So as always, thanks for listening to this episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more fun and entertaining episodes. Special guests will be aired on YouTube, and other collabs will be on other broadcasting platforms. Visit our website megaversion.com and email us at megaversion2020@gmail.com. If you have any media or inquiry request, email us. Feedback is always appreciated.
Yeah, so we will link Miss Victoria's website below, and you can look through her website to find her podcast, blogs, and her services, so make sure to check that out.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Mrs. Victoria, for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Have a great day, everyone. It's me, Varsha.
And Mega.
Signing off.